Hi, I'm Stephanie from Museums.love. Today I want to show you one of Berlin's most photogenic museums, the Bode Museum. The facade has been photographed countless times, but I want to show you that the interior is just as spectacular. The marble and gold entryway is one of the most fabulous things that you can see for free on Museum Island. And inside is one of my favorite cafes overlooking the luxurious interior. And of course I want to show you some of the fascinating artworks inside. So I've invited my good friend and expert in medieval art, Dr. Jitske Jasperse, to show us some of her chosen objects in the collection. Particularly, she'll show us the objects that can tell stories about how medieval women influenced art production, whether as artists, patrons, or subjects. Jitske, thank you so much for taking the time and showing us some of the objects in the Bode Museum today. I'm really, really happy to be here with you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I think it's super cool to talk about some of my favorite pieces at the Bode Museum, where they have tons of sculpture, of which I will show you some examples. And this is one of the examples I particularly like. Talking about women, this is the Virgin Mary, basically split in two because you can open her. So what we're looking at in its current state is the Virgin. We see her head and we see her shoulders. And if you were to close it, you would see that the little guy standing here is actually the Christ child who's standing on her lap. And this is a so-called a shrine virgin, or Vierge ouvrante. They are sort of famous all over Europe, so it's not a particularly German phenomenon, although this is probably a German piece. What I like about it is I have a particular taste for objects that are not so beautiful, but are a little bit scruffy. And here an important part is missing. What is actually missing is a completely different piece of sculpture, namely the Throne of Mercy, which is an enthroned God figure who has his son in his lap and who has the Holy Ghost above his head. And that it's God, we can sort of see that because of the cross nimbus. So when it's a cross, it's usually God.
That makes sense. So it would have been above the head of the figures.
Yeah. So it's basically a virgin that has her Christ child in her tummy, but then as a grown-up man sitting on his father's lap.
Wow!
So it's all about Christ, because it's also the Annunciation, which you can see on the wings, the inside of the wings, where the Archangel Gabriel announces to the Virgin that she will give birth to a child, the Christ child.
So the theme of birth is pretty specific, isn't it? Because it shows the annunciation of the birth about to happen, and it shows a young Jesus figure on the outside, and then on the inside. And
the inside, there would be the grown. So it's maybe a little bit grossy that there is a grown-up Christ in her inside. As you would open her, she would have a full grown, but also a deceased son in her inner body. And I think this is these kinds of objects have been studied before, and apparently there's not much known about the exact function or use of these statues, although there are a lot. They're also in museum collections in the US, for example, in the Metropolitan Museum has one. But the fact that so many of them have parts missing suggests that they were a particular maybe uncanny object that enticed people to maybe rip the inner parts of it out of the Virgin. People were actually sort of worried by this weird combination of the sort of the earthly mother, because she gave birth to God or to Christ, but she herself is an earthly person. So to have in your uterus, so to speak, then the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is sort of
a lot for a uterus.
Yeah, a lot to bear. And apparently there are also smaller ones, like 30 centimeters high, and that seemed to have been used for private devotion.
Oh wow, at home?
So at home, probably,
Maybe also with the theme of birth for women at home?
I could really, that I think is really imaginable, that you would feel attracted to that. Also, because there are some where you can sort of I would say take the belly apart, and that seems to me very suggestive of giving birth to another sculpture. A little bit like the Matrushka, the dolls that you can put in one to each other, and each one gives birth to a new one. I think there was definitely this connotation, and here also because of the Annunciation. So the Virgin getting told that she will get a child. It also shows us, in a way, what is expected of women. It was sort of the idea to give birth, to have children, is expected of basically any medieval woman. Right. So the Virgin is also a role model, but one of the role models, like in modern times, it's sort of not doable to actually get to that stage because she's such a special person. And I think she is, or we know that she's the most venerated saint in the medieval period.
So tell us about this object. This also looks very fabulous and gold.
Shine and bling. Well, in a way, it goes to show how famous the Virgin Mary is in the medieval period, because again, like the one we just discussed that you could open and close, this is the Virgin, again with her son. But this one, it's also of wood, but there's nothing to be opened or closed. It's sort of what you see is what you get. But the cool thing about this one, and why I selected it, is not just because it has tiny lions that look like cats that are underneath her feet, but also because of the inscription. And I won't read it out loud, but it's a Latin inscription, as was common. It's from Italy, so it was common in the medieval Latin world. That Latin, so the Western world, that Latin was the church language. And it gives us a date, because it says, in the year of the Lord 1199, in the month of January, this sculpture was made, sort of, or commissioned by the Abbot Peter and made by Presbyter Martinus, or Martin, and with lots, well, I was going to say with lots of love, but they showed their devotion by saying amor, with their love. And it also gives us a clue about what is represented here, because this is not just the Virgin with the child, but this is the Virgin as a throne. So the Virgin is the throne for her son, and her son is the wisdom. So this is why these kinds of sculptures are called a sedis, so throne, sapientiae, wisdom, a throne of wisdom. And it's often thought that Mary is on the throne, and yes, she is enthroned, but she herself is the throne. She is the one that gave birth to the wisdom. In the Old Testament, or in the first book of Kings, which is about Solomon, his throne is discussed, and this is one with 6 steps. And I think if we could count with some imagination, we could actually envision that it has 6 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And every step had a lion next to it, which is not represented here, but this is the reason why these lions are underneath her feet. And as you can see, that the child is not really a child here. It's a miniature version of an adult, and he is ruling as a wise sort of Christian ruler. He is the ruling Christ. And this is the way he is represented, with the orb over which the Christian world, over which he sort of rules, and then with his arms stretched out to make a blessing for all of the Christians. So he is a small ruler, sitting on the lap of his mother, who also, who gave birth to this wisdom. And there's not a really mother-son interaction, which is also because it's sort of about 1200. It's not uncommon for that time to have a less of an emotional connection between mother and child. And in the later medieval period, you see these more intimate scenes where Mary is really more nursing, taking care of her child. But here it's very abstract. It's sort of visualizing very abstract notions of wisdom and about sort of divine rule over the world in 2 figures that every medieval person would know, the mother and her child.
So this object is a real change from the other ones that we're seeing. Tell us about this one.
Well, you may think first, what does it have to do with women? Because the central figure is a crucified Christ. But if we look more carefully, we see more than one woman. For example, on Christ's right, which is our left, we see the three Marys. So his mother, who's at the front grieving, has her mantle sort of put up, taken to her face as a sign of grief. And then, of course, the famous Mary Magdalene is there, and then the third Mary, whose role is always being the third Mary. Sort of sad. I selected this one because it's not a monumental piece, but a smaller piece. It's actually made of ivory, so not wood, but it's made of the tusk of an elephant, and probably an elephant from Africa. And it's made in Constantinople, which is now known as Istanbul. But the cool thing about this object is, again, that you can open and close it. And the central theme is the crucified Christ. But if you were now to close it, you would encounter a cross again, but then a cross that has no person hanging onto it, on it. But it makes it already clear that probably the theme of the cross is really important for this triptych. So it's has basically three wings. And the importance of the cross, and here comes the woman back into the story, is emphasized even more by the two figures that are represented in the lower left corner, which I'm pretty sure you've recognized who they are.
Probably the ruling couple?
Yes, but then the
Constantine and his mom?
Yes, exactly. It's Constantine and his mom Helena. So Constantine, in a way, the founder of Constantinople, and his mother Helena, who, so the legend goes, got tons of money from her son to visit the Holy Land and to find all the places and pieces connected to the life of Christ. And in Jerusalem, she then found the Holy Cross, not far from the place where Christ had been buried. So the cross that they are holding together actually represents the Holy Cross, of which she only found pieces. She actually found the three crosses, so not just that was the one that was used to crucify Christ on, but also the one where the murderers, the one that was guilty and the innocent one, were crucified as well. So I thought this is a really nice way of showing how women are part of the history. And even if we may not believe in the story of the finding of the cross, it was a really well-known story throughout the Middle Ages, and just not in the West, but also in the East, because we're here in Byzantium. As you can also see from the Greek inscription, so it's not Latin but Greek. So I think this is a great example of showing that women are not just objects of devotion, such as the Virgin Mary, but also are sort of foundational part of how history was written and how objects were praised in a way.
And Helena, isn't she holding the sphere that represents the Christian world?
Yes, especially because it's been topped by a cross. I would definitely say they are also the founders of the Christian world,
And Helena no less than Constantine.
Yeah. She's holding the orb. Yeah.
So now we have a statue in a different material, different size and scale. I'm excited to hear about this one.
Yeah, so this is a limestone statue, and although you may think that she is a saint, she is not. She's a queen. So this one is a nice example of queens who actually commissioned artworks. It's Queen Joanna of France, or Joan of France. After she died, she left a will, and from that will we know that she wanted to have a college, so a university college built in Paris.
Whoa.
So she had a Franciscan college built in Paris. It was the second famous college, or the University of Paris. And this is she, so this is the one who commissioned that college to be built. She did not commission the statue, and it was probably once part of the whole college structure, and she is represented here as the founder of the college, which is represented here in the shape of a chapel. So here we finally have a woman who left her mark as a patron, basically. So this female founder, who would not have access to the education at the college herself because she was a woman, managed to found a college that was accessible for boys from any status. As long as they were from France, they could apply.
Wow, that was probably radical in terms of public education at the time.
Yes, and it probably has to do with the fact that this is a Franciscan college, which belongs to the preachers, the wandering preachers, that have ideas about the education of all kinds of people, and this is probably why she tried to also have non-elite boys admitted. Of course, you had to be allowed in, so you could apply, but then you have to wait and see whether you would actually be accepted.
Oh, yeah.
This is a very small statue, so it probably wasn't part of the outside of the architectural structure, but somewhere on its inside, someone on its sort of inner spaces, but we don't know exactly where. What we do know, however, because if we sort of look here at its back, we see a hole, which suggests that she was sort of one way or another stuck against a wall or a niche. So probably there would have been a niche sort of covering her side and back, in which she would have been part of an architectural setting. They would have known that this would have been Joanna. For us, it's difficult to see. We would think she's a saint. She looks like the Virgin, but the child is replaced by an architectural feature.
Right.
Actually, this object is now part of the exhibition, the museum exhibition, The Second Glance, about women, in which they want to shed a different light on women in history and in the museum. And I think the museum does that very well, creating these smaller exhibitions based on their permanent collections.
The pieces you chose to show us today, I think, gave us a really good view of how women's roles and their impact on art could take several different forms, whether they're the subject, the artist, the patron or patroness. But that's also something we can see in other periods too, not just the medieval period. And I know you happen to have written a book on the subject. Would you tell us a little bit about some of the themes that you're working with, some of the observations you could make?
Yeah, so first, my book is in Dutch, and I will read it in Dutch, the title. It's called Het vrouwelijk oog wil ook wat. Vrouwen als opdrachtgevers, verzamelaars en kunstenaars, which you could sort of roughly translate with the female eye or the female gaze also wants something, or as I like to say, is also in for a treat. And then women as patrons, collectors, and artists. And I think what my book and I have demonstrated is that even though every period has its own specific roles for women, that when you go from the medieval up till the 20th century, as I did with this book, that you realize that how crucial women have been in the creation, the curation, the collecting of art throughout the centuries. So I think I've demonstrated that in my book that women played a much more active role than we actually think or that we can imagine. And I think in part that has to do with institutions like this, the Bode Museum itself, but also many other institutions that were sort of created by men and also for men in a way to display artists, geniuses,
right.
And had less interest in showing a wide variety of objects maybe and a wide variety of their makers. Mm-hmm. And in my book I've shown how wide this variety of makers of art actually is.
Yeah. Congratulations on a beautiful book. Very, very important topic. And thank you one last time for the wonderful look into all these objects today.
Thank you, Stephanie, for having me. It was such fun to talk with you about objects that I think have important stories to tell. So yeah, thanks.
More museums than ever are highlighting the role of women in art production, especially as artists. But there's a long way to go before women are highlighted in their roles in museums, whether it's as artists or even as museum directors. So although temporary exhibitions are a step in the right direction, there's still a long way to go before recognizing women becomes standard practice. Along the way, we'll need a lot more research, like Jitske's, and a lot more activism. You can find out more about Jitske's book and links to all the objects we discussed today on museums.love. I'll see you there.